Great, so let's get started. So hello everyone and welcome. My name is Mary McLennan. I lead what's called the UN Behavioral Science Group, which is an initiative of the UN Innovation Network. And today we'll be talking about behavioral science and climate in the Asia Pacific. So an interesting panel today with colleagues from across the region, from governments to the UN. So we'll have an interesting discussion on this topic. Before we dive into that, I just wanted to start with some context and background in terms of behavioral science in the UN. This is one of the first webinars we've hosted within the region, so maybe a few of you aren't so familiar with our work and what we do. So essentially, the Behavioral Science Group brings together over 1,000 colleagues from more than 60 entities in 110 countries. There's quite a lot of interest and demand for behavioral science in the UN. The group ranges from not only across geographies, but also with respect to the domains in which colleagues work, from climate, as we'll be discussing today, through to health, gender, peace and security. So it's really vast and wide ranging. And then also with respect to the experience colleagues have with behavioral science. So although we have some behavioral scientists in the UN doing some great work, we also have a lot of colleagues who are at the early stages of their journey, thinking through how can I apply behavioral science to my first project or my second project. So there's lots there as well for us to discuss depending on where our colleagues are. So that's the group. And then now looking at more of a higher level in the UN, you might be familiar with some statements the Secretary General has put out over the last number of years with respect to behavioral science. So this is just one which calls behavioral science a critical tool for the UN to progress on its mandate, also encourages entities to invest in behavioral science and to work together, which is what we aim to do in the UN Behavioral Science Group. So in addition to this, the Secretary General has included behavioral science in what's called our common agenda, which is his plan for the second term of his role. This is the ambitious agenda, basically the plan for his term, and covers lots of areas from climate, health, etc. But for our purposes, what's in there is behavioral science has been included in this idea of the quintet of change. These are 5 areas that the Secretary General has deemed important for the UN to be more nimble and effective and really deliver on this ambitious agenda that he has laid out. So I'll share with you some of the links to those documents if you're keen to know more about how the Secretary General sees behavioral science. In addition to that, there's also a guidance note that has been released by the Secretary General, which covers more details, specifically how he sees behavioral science applied in the UN. So just briefly here, there are different ways you can engage with existing work and past work by a number of colleagues in the UN. So there's the guidance note that I mentioned. There's also the UN Behavioral Science Report, which features the experiences of 25 UN entities. So there you can read about case studies and also what each entity is sort of doing with respect to behavioral science more broadly. And then we've also released a practitioner's guide to getting started with behavioral science. So thinking through some initial how would you do this? What kind of methods might you employ? And I know we'll cover a little bit of that in our discussion today as well. And then secondly, if you're here, there's a good chance you're probably a part of the UN Behavioral Science Group. But if you are not, I encourage you to do so. Again, I'll share some of those links in the chat. So the group, as I said, is over 1,000 UN colleagues, but we also have thousands of colleagues outside the UN who are observers who from governments, civil society, international organizations outside the UN, academia, the private sector. So we're really aiming to create opportunities for colleagues in the UN to engage with those outside and form partnerships, etc. And then lastly, you can follow us on Twitter, UN_BSci or UN_innovation, which essentially you can get a more real-time understanding of what we do overall. So with that, I'll also maybe do a quick plug here for an event that we host every year and we co-host with a number of entities, actually. So it's UN Behavioral Science Week. It will be taking place again in June this year. This is from last year's, obviously, 2022. But just to show, we had 18 entities participate. We had 21 sessions. So there's lots to come in the number of months as well. And if you want to know more about this, if you sign up for the UN Behavioral Science Group, you will no doubt get some notifications about the weekend and when it will take place. Okay, so now on to our session for today. So essentially what we'll be doing is we'll be hearing from our panelists. They'll speak for about half an hour, so approximately half of our discussion today, and then we'll have lots of time for Q&A. So we ask you to put your question in the Q&A box. We'll be taking questions from there. If you'd like to chat in the chat function on Zoom, you're welcome to do that, but the questions we'll be asking our panelists will come from the Q&A box. And you can also look at those questions and upvote the ones you're more interested in hearing answers to. So if you don't have a question yourself, I would encourage you to check out the box to see see what's there and which ones you might want to steer the discussion towards yourselves. Okay, so now on to our speakers for today. So first we'll be hearing from Changyun Wei from the UNDP Accelerator Lab in Malaysia. So if you're not familiar with UNDP Accelerator Labs and you're interested in behavioral science in the UN, like I'm sure many of you are, I would very much encourage you to check out Accelerator Labs. They're in I think over 90 countries now, doing really interesting work with respect to behavioral science, but also other areas of innovation. So I'll share some of those links for those of you who are interested. And UNDP Malaysia is doing some really, really cool stuff, as we'll hear about today. And then we'll hear from Yi Xiang from the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment in Singapore. So again, for those of you in the behavioral science community, probably is a good chance you've heard about the work of Singapore. They've been applying behavioral science in a number of ways over many years. So we're very keen to hear from him. And he's also been a key player in the international behavioral science community, sharing some interesting ideas and new ways and frameworks, which he'll touch upon as well. And then last, we'll hear from Yusuke Tagaki from Yokohama Behavioral Insights and Design Team in Japan. So he's, again, really doing interesting work over the last number of years, particularly in climate space here. And I think it's an interesting contrast about how we apply behavioral science at the more national level versus the more local level. And we'll maybe hear about some of that as well today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn it over to our first speaker for today from UNDP Malaysia. Over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. So thanks for tuning in for my first session from Accelerator Lab. I'll be sharing a little bit based on the experiments that we have run that involves behavioral science. And as Mary has mentioned, Accelerator Lab is set up in 100 over UNDP offices, and we typically run short experiments to test out hypotheses and also to see how we are able to scale some of these learnings and actionable intelligence into bigger programs and to pilot them before we actually extend it across national programs, for example. So I'll be sharing three different experiments that we have run that works in shifting youth attitudes and action towards the environment. The first one being the Urban Biodiversity Challenge. This was actually a challenge that we created, repackage it based on the City Nature Challenge. So the City Nature Challenge was done globally as a way to encourage people to take pictures of flora and fauna and upload it into an app called iNaturalist. So what it helps to do is that the app enables you to interact with other users. If you can't understand or you don't know the name of certain flora and fauna, there's also a whole database that helps match those pictures that you have taken to more taxonomy kind of names, scientific names, and everyone gets to contribute into the database as well. So using the same app and the similar kind of concept of the City Nature Challenge, we created the Urban Biodiversity Challenge because we know that urban biodiversity is one of the critical issues that Malaysia is facing, especially with 70% of people moving to the urban side, and there's a lot of urbanization that's been happening. We run this challenge in order to create awareness to the communities and to the people in general to appreciate the flora and fauna that's right behind their backyard. So with that as well, we also wanted to create intelligence to see how we could probably engage the people or the public better using the data and information that we have gathered from the gamification of the challenge itself. So using that app, we managed to mobilize about 756 participants that made about 21,409 observations across 2,567 species over that 1 month period of campaigning and the challenge. And it has given us a lot of insight into what does the participants relate to their relationship with the natural environment. What do they notice, what they don't notice? For example, we noticed that a lot of them take pictures of birds, even though it's harder to capture, but majority of the observations are actually birds. And there's very little on amphibians, notably because they are also only comes out at night and all that, but it also helps us to understand what are the things that they see or they don't see, and what are the things that they like to capture around their habitat as well. So that created a lot of entry points for us to engage with our stakeholders, whether on the ground or with government, in building our biodiversity plans with the communities. So that's one of it. The second one with the project, or second and third projects, is kind of related, and it started with a animation video, which we have done in order to raise awareness about river conservation in general. Wanted people to take care of their river, especially at the urban areas. So one way that UNDP thought would be good to start with is having an animation from the local characters that people could identify with. Because typically in UN, we speak a lot of English, and we realize we haven't been localizing a lot of the narrative, especially on climate change, to the local context, right? We talk about polar bears and all that, but in Malaysia, for example, we don't have polar bears. So it's harder for people to relate. So we created a narrative using an animation with a local character. And in that campaign, or the video launch itself, we ran a nudge experiment using social pressure to create interest among the communities to take actions. So in that campaign, or that nudge challenge, we managed to split the audience into like two separate groups, a control group and a group where they will receive more messaging relating to how many people are already taking action on river conservation, what type of actions are being taken, how many people have pledged for river conservation, for example, to kind of create certain social pressure for people to take action. And from that campaign, or that experiment itself, we actually found that the group that received more of this social pressure messaging actually has 9% higher completion rate, and are 13% more likely to provide proof of their completion of the actions that they took in conserving rivers compared to the control group. So there were significant differences that we see when people actually are more motivated when they see their peers taking actions on certain things, rather than just being very incentive-based, where you see a lot of campaigns and challenge and environmental groups typically offer them a prize at the end, but it's not sustainable in the long run. And that's one of the few feedbacks that we got from the civil society as well. And with the finding from this nudge experiment, we actually managed to incorporate into the Eco-Life challenge that we did with our partner in Iskandar, Malaysia. It's one of the regional authorities. What we did is we embedded the video and we gamified this whole challenge into the digital space, notably also because that time was COVID-19, and a lot of the physical interactions that we had to be paused, and they were figuring out how do we still engage students, parents, and teachers to continue with the Eco-Life challenge and keep it interactive in that whole process. So one of the things that ACLab came in to help with our partner was to gamify it, to add the elements of behavioral science, and to also make it a bit more interactive for the kids through leaderboards, for example, when they see their friends doing it and examples of actions that their friends are taking. We also see more behavior taken up by the students as well in running the Eco-Life challenge within their home space. So we compared the results of the Eco-Life challenge participations in 2020, which is pre-pandemic kind of a period, to 2022. And we saw an increase in number of schools and uptake of students participating in the challenge itself as well. So those are some of the positive results of how we have used behavioral science in creating more awareness and also environmental actions among the youth and children in general. So yeah, so that's my presentation for today, and I'm open for any questions later on as well. Over to you, Mary.
Great, thank you so much for that. I think we already have some questions coming in. Yeah, so we'll get to those afterwards. I'm keen to hear those as well. I've also put the link to Accelerator Labs in the chat for those of you who want to know more about the Accelerator Labs and Accelerator Labs Malaysia, but feel free to add more resources if you'd like to from your work too. Okay, so on to our next presentation from Singapore. Over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Yi Xiang from Singapore's Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment. And I wish all of you a good morning and good afternoon, depends on where you are. I'd like to thank Mary and the team at UN Innovation Network for organizing this webinar and letting us have the opportunity to share with you the work my research unit has done to apply behavioral insights to Singapore's public sector sustainability. And hopefully, after today's sharing, you'll be able to have some ideas on what you can do for your country as well. But before I dive into the topic of behavioral insights, please allow me to share with you a little more on the Singapore Green Plan. The Singapore Green Plan is a multi-ministry effort that was unveiled 2 years ago, and as Singapore's whole-of-nation movement to advance the national agenda on sustainable development. The Green Plan consists of 6 pillars, and behavioral insights has a role to play in all of them, especially sustainable living and green government. To explain a little more on green government, it is an initiative that galvanizes the public sector to take the lead in driving sustainability so that the rest of the nation will follow. And as the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment, we wanted to set an example for other ministries by empowering our officers with the ability to become ambassadors for recycling, so that we will be able to teach others how to recycle right. This is the part where behavioral insights come in. For the benefit of those who are less familiar, there are many different types of behavior change frameworks, and these are some of the more popular ones. These different frameworks have their own unique strengths, so my unit decided to distill all the essence from these frameworks and develop our own that caters to our needs. We call our framework UNITE, which stands for Understand, Ideate, Test, and Expand. Using this framework, we designed a recycling campaign that aimed to fulfill the objective that I mentioned earlier. So first of all, to transform our officers into ambassadors for recycling, we needed to understand what was lacking. We carried out a pre-campaign survey that asked many different questions, but the 3 main metrics that we decided to track are whether they had a recycling corner at home, whether they knew much about recycling, and whether they shared with others about recycling. What we found is most of our officers who responded had a recycling corner, but many were still uncertain about recycling, and they did not share much about it. So the campaign aimed to change that. We started ideating about how to address the barriers that were uncovered through the pre-campaign survey, and we decided to use the Behavioral Insights team EASE method to generate ideas. We knew that it was important to make recycling easy for our officers, so the very first step of our campaign was to get them to start a recycling corner. Completing simple actions like these earned our officers chances to win prizes in a lucky draw, which made the campaign more attractive for them. In addition, we designed the campaign to be more social, to help our officers share about recycling, and we ensured that compliments were given to them in a timely manner to positively reinforce their actions. To dispel the uncertainties our officers had about recycling, we also designed our infographics to make them easy to understand, specifically targeting the common misconceptions uncovered through the pre-campaign survey. We also tried to explain to our officers why certain seemingly recyclable items can't be recycled, so that they can hopefully extrapolate the reasoning to other similar items as well. In the end, the team came up with a simple 2-step flowchart for our officers to follow, minimally ensuring that the items that they put in recycling bins are clean, even if they are not always right in knowing what's recyclable. To test whether the campaign was effective for the metrics we have identified, we conducted a post-campaign survey that asked the same questions. We were glad that the percentage points increased across all 3 metrics, although for the metric of sharing, it seems like our officers were still too shy to discuss about recycling with others. After learning what worked and what didn't work through this campaign, we expanded the impact by sharing the knowledge with our comms colleagues who were able to educate the public through social media. True enough, the social media content they created using the same behavioral science principles received lots of public engagement. Subsequently, We also shared our learnings with our public sector sustainability ambassadors network, inspiring many other government agencies to start recycling campaigns, thereby creating a multiplier effect. In a separate project, my team is now trying to teach primary school students how to use a simplified version of the UNITE framework to solve environmental challenges in their own school setting. Based on our observations, the students are able to pick up these behavioral science concepts quite easily. And that gives us much hope that we'll be able to nurture them into citizens who can contribute to solving bigger environmental challenges for our society. So to conclude on a few takeaways, it is evident that behavior is inherent in environmental issues and climate action. So applying behavioral insights is definitely natural and necessary. While we say that sustainability is a whole of nation effort, it is important for public sector to set a good example, and we believe behavioral insights can help to support this effort. Finally, if even young children are able to understand behavioral science concepts, this means that employing behavioral insights should be accessible to everyone, and we should try to harness it as much as possible to achieve a greater impact. That's all I have to share today, and I hope this has been useful for all of you. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for the presentation. There's lots in there in a short period of time, so I'm sure we'll have some questions to dive into in more detail. I already see some coming through, but really interesting how you're able to take what worked and didn't work and translate that in different contexts and ways, and I think there's some interesting things we can explore there as well. Okay, so on to our last presentation for today. Yusuke, over to you.
Thank you very much. So let me share my screen. Yeah. So, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Yusuke Takagi, Vice Director of Yokohama Behavioral Insight and Design Team. We call it YBIT. And I also belong to Behavioral Science Team, Policy Garage, which is a nonprofit organization in Japan. Today, I'd like to introduce how we use behavioral science frameworks to carry out the project at the local government level. To show that, I'd like to share our case on food waste reduction project. Before moving on to the details, let me just briefly explain about our team, YBIT. Our team, YBIT, is based in city of Yokohama, which is the second largest city in Japan, which is the southwest of Tokyo. And YBIT was established in 2019 as the first net unit amongst Japanese local governments. And our members are composed of city government officials and external advisors. And we also established a nonprofit organization called Policy Garage in order to disseminate our behavioral science initiatives to other cities and regions in Japan. At Policy Garage, we employ behavioral science, evidence policy making, and design thinking. In particular, we focus on behavioral science. And so far, we have 14 local government level behavioral insight teams in Japan, and the Policy Garage is supporting them. The reason why we focus on local government is that the local government officials work on the very front line of policy implementation and service delivery. So this means like they have a lot of touch points with citizens. So we consider the impact will be huge if they effectively use behavioral science at their work. So next, I'd like to move on to our project details. City of Yokohama is confronted with the challenge of food waste. Although the city has been carrying out multiple awareness-raising campaign, the food waste from restaurants still remain high. So the city decided to take behavioral science approach. Resource and Waste Recycling Bureau concluded a public-private partnership agreement with a restaurant chain. So this kind of Hawaiian restaurant chain to find out effective and scalable behaviorally informed solutions. And why we decided to support this project. But then, how we design behavioral intervention. At YBIT, we usually take very simple 3-step approach to design intervention. This 3-step approach is roughly based on the OECD's basic framework. but we made it as simple as possible because we work with busy, practitioners at local government levels. So in this approach, so we first identify target behavior, and second step is to identify frictions and field of behavior. For these processes, we usually develop this kind of behavior process map. By breaking down one behavior into micro behaviors and map out the processes, we try to figure out where we should intervene. After these processes, we design nudges based on EAST framework. We consider EAST framework is very useful even for local government officials in Japan. So let's look at the details in this project. So first step is to identify target behavior. So we need to narrow down a target. In this case, the food waste is still, too broad topic. So we needed to narrow down the scope. First, we decided to focus on restaurant this time rather than household. And we decided to focus on our cart menu and lunch. But still, we were not sure about what kind of behavior can be a target, right? So we carried out a baseline survey. Through a baseline survey, we got a clues for the intervention. We got key targets, which are rice, kids, and females. For instance, rice accounts for 31% of overall residue, and the group with kids leave more food than the group with no kids by 47% points difference. This is huge difference, right? And the female-only group leaves more food compared to a male-only group and a mixed group. Then, as a next step, we try to identify frictions and fields of behavior on this kind of behavior process map. So today, I don't go into detail, but we analyzed barriers of behavior at each behavior process, something like this. And after that, we designed interventions based on EAST framework. For behavior analysis and brainstorming interventions, we closely worked with restaurant chain staff. Their insights were very helpful for us to design nudges. After these processes, to select interventions to carry out, we decided to shift our focus to the upstream of the behavior process. This was very important in this project, actually. By focusing on the upstream, we can prevent the risks of food waste that can happen at the latter part of behavior process, right? In addition, we selected intervention based on feasibility, cost effectiveness, scalability, and we also considered COVID-19 situation. And we got 3 interventions. So let's look at details. The first intervention is to order a proper amount of food. So we visualize amount of a meal like this. And we made the choice of rice portion as the default option, something like this. So the staff always ask the customers about the portion of rice. And second intervention is to encourage eat up. Oh, sorry. It's still.
You're okay. Keep going. We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So second intervention is to encourage to eat up all the food on the plate. So we offered eat up campaign for kids. Those who eat up a plate will get as much as snacks, funky and grass handful. And those who eat up a plate will receive this kind of testimonial from our staff. And third intervention is we put the cartoon, graphic card, something like this on table, which tells a journey of rice from a farm to a restaurant. Let's look at the result. So overall, our leftovers reduced to about 80 to 90% in each intervention. But this time we focused on rice, right? So what about the rice? The residue of rice reduced by 26% points in intervention 1, like this, and 23% points in intervention 2. So those interventions were successful, but it has increased by 4% points in intervention 3, this consumer. So this was not successful. Result in details. Customer who chose their small or large amount of rice increased from 8 to 26%. So it seems like the customers could choose, more customers could choose the proper amount of a meal. And intervention Second, although this intervention focuses on kids, it also contributed to the residue reduction of a group of adults. So we could see a very interesting secondary effect on this intervention. So lessons learned, first, a good point. The project effectively involves policymakers and restaurant staff to analyze behaviors of customers.
If I can just interrupt you, I think your slides may have not been progressing. We're on slide 13 right now. I'm not sure where you are, but
seems like that. Yeah, I noticed. Maybe that's why I don't. Maybe very sorry about that.
I thought you were talking. Okay, you can go back a little bit. Yeah, we were up to slide 13.
13.
That's
okay.
Where we were. Yeah. Right. So anything after that.
Okay. Sorry for that. So this is intervention too. So we try to encourage eat up all the food on the plate. So we offered eat up campaign for kids, and those who eat up a plate will get as much snacks as one can grasp a handful. And those who eat up a plate will receive this kind of testimonials. This is intervention second. And third intervention, we put a cartoon graphic card on the table, which says journey of rice from a farm to a restaurant, something like this. So, and this is a result. So overall leftovers reduced to about 80 to 90% in each intervention. But this time we focused on rice. So what about rice? The residue of rice reduced by 26% points in intervention 1, like this, and 23% points in intervention 2. So those interventions were successful, but it has increased by 4% points in intervention 3. This intervention, the cartoon one, was not successful. And I'd like to share result in details. So customers who chose the small or large size of rice increased from 8 to 26%. So it seems like more customers could choose the proper amount of food more easily. And intervention second, so although this intervention focuses on kids, it also contributed to the residue reduction of a group of adults. So we could see very interesting side, secondary effect. And lessons learned, a good point. This project effectively involves policymakers and restaurant staff to analyze behavior of customers and brainstorm nudge ideas. And on-site survey was very helpful in narrowing down target customers and the type of food to be intervened. And focusing on make it easy, like a default option, was very good decision. It was very successful. And rooms for improvement, nudges to be implemented should be narrowed down based on more evidence search. So this time we couldn't do that. But for instance, nowadays we could see a lot of evidences that shows the effectiveness of social type of nudges for pro-environmental behavior. So we can try that kind of nudges next time maybe. And it will be better if the project could evaluate and show the cost effectiveness of the intervention. So we couldn't do this, but probably, next time, I think we should do this next time. And we learned that nudges which require an additional behavior step, like reading a brochure or cartoon, might be difficult because we add, additional 1 steps. So that's all. We are still working on other projects in the field of environment. So we'd like to reflect what we have, learned in this project on the future project. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Lots in there to explore as well. Interesting about the cost effectiveness too. It's always something that comes up. We don't often have time to do it, but maybe we can explore that as well in the questions. Okay, so I see we've had a few questions for UNDP Malaysia which have been answered, but I might ask you to also answer them in discussion just for colleagues who are not reading. That's right. So I'll ask you all some questions now in sequence. So for UNDP Malaysia, there were some questions about, for the nudge experiment, do you have any tracking of the behavior about the pledge? People would like to know. I know you've answered it, but if you want to just sort of paraphrase. And then also regarding your presentation, what measures did you apply to look for the change in the target audiences? So maybe just speak to those points that you've already written down. Thanks.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we didn't do a longitudinal monitoring for the nudge experiment, simply because it was quite hard to track the same group of people who have answered it in social media to kind of follow up with them 6 months later or 1 year later, but we did do a pre and post survey prior to the pledge to understand what was their perception about river conservation and the issues, and see whether there was a change of perception as well as more pledges of the frequency of actions that will take in the future, right? And most of the limitations of these experiments, of course, these are self-reported data. So we could only take it at that face value at that moment. But moving on with that, we did interview some of our CSOs who have participated in the pledge event to understand whether they have seen an effect among their stakeholders that they work with on a weekly basis, for example, and see if there's a change of behavior. So it does shows that people don't require incentive in that sense in order to take actions on things, and just having that social pressure and understanding about how they could make a difference or conserve the river. We understand that a lot of them can't take action also because they don't know what to do or what's available outside for them to take actions. Those have helped them to actually change their lifestyle and continue with that momentum in the long run. But the longitudinal effect of it can be observed more on the Eco-Life Challenge. We kind of took out the nudge experiment findings or learnings and applied it in a digital platform. And what we see is that there are an increased participation among the students, parents even, in making a change in the way that they live, how much electricity they save, the recycling rates, and those are reported through the Eco-Life Challenge, which is done annually. So we have a bit more data, and there's continuous monitoring with the teachers and the parents that we work with. One of the parents actually told us that after the campaign, the kids start voluntarily picking up rubbish as they were walking through the parks and nearby the rivers. And we thought that was some of the small success that we could see, how an animation or some of these kind of pledge events could spur awareness and also actions among the young. Yeah.
Interesting. It's so interesting with behavioral science more broadly, how the methods we use are changing. It's not just randomized control trials, there's surveys, there's different ways of measuring, and then taking that policy lens to think, what can we infer from this, from whatever we found and used. But very interesting there in your results. Okay, so next over to Singapore, we have a few questions for you. There's some questions around your Unite framework. So just been going a bit of detail in terms of how you developed it and why you developed it. I know you spoke about it briefly, but maybe a bit more there. And then also to further elaborate on how you use behavioral science to teach sustainability to children in schools, particularly in the UN. I think there would be some interest in that. So over to you.
Thanks, Marie. Maybe I'll be honest, and we'll share that the framework was actually a kind of a formalization of the process that we usually use in our projects. So we observe like this is the way that we've been doing projects. We first go by understanding what the problem statement is before diving into finding out like what kind of solutions there are, and then testing them and see how we can actually scale them. So maybe it was not articulated in the past, but as we gain this experience, we realized that we could actually put in a process, and we see like how the other behavioral frameworks that are out there, like Combi model and like EASE framework, how they actually complement this entire process that we were carrying out, where they actually fit in our entire process the best. So, for example, under the understand phase, we heavily use things like Combi model, or what we actually call context, ability, and motivation, to find out a bit more about our target audience. Then using the EASE framework to generate ideas, because the EASE framework helps in giving you ideas on how to create things that are easy, attractive, social, and timely. And actually, as we go along doing this, we realize that the process is pretty much similar to what you can find in design thinking. And I think quite recently, UKPIT shared about their TEST framework as well, which stands for Target, Explore, Solution, Trial, and then Scale, which essentially is actually the same as what we're saying, just in other words. So I think that's pretty much like how we came about. There's no real like forceful way that we actually came out with the framework. It just naturally took its own form, I would say. Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I mean, I think so. We have one we put together for the UN that's based on sort of the way we frame things in the UN, and I think the fields. I mean, this is perhaps a personal opinion, but the fields kind of converged on these areas of the understanding, the designing, the testing, as you can